Mike, I'll start with you. Republicans and their supporters spent at least 66 million dollars in this Senate primary. Was it worth it for the residents of Ohio? And was it worth it for the Republican Party?
Thank you, Mike. That's a great opening question. I think if you're J.D. Vance, it was probably worth it, that would be my guess. But you're right, it was really record spending on the Republican side of the Senate seat. And when you're talking about states like Ohio, which continue to be among the most important in the nation, not just at the state level, but also at the federal level, that type of money needed to be spent because the U.S. Senate does hang in balance. There was a pretty aggressive campaign, as I'm sure everyone would tell you. It's a lot of money to get a very important seat in the state, and I think you'd have to do a poll of Ohio to see if they think it was worth it. You know, you had candidates that started the race very early, some who dropped out. But in the end, it was a very aggressive messaging war. You had the president weigh in, which was certainly very important. And time will tell how the general election plays out, but I think most people think it was a good opportunity to see what all the candidates brought to the table.
Rex Helsas has joined us. I'm sure you're all familiar with who he is. Rex, welcome.
Nice to be here.
If it was not for Donald Trump's endorsement, would J.D. Vance have won?
Had it not been for Peter Thiel's $12 million, J.D. Vance would not have won. It took both. The endorsement by Trump is typically in any state at this point in the Republican primary worth about 30 to 35%. Obviously, that in and of itself might have worked, but I will tell you that had J.D. Vance not had Peter Thiel invest $10 million early, I also don't believe J.D. Vance would have been progressed long enough for Donald Trump to even consider an endorsement. So the endorsement in and of itself would not have happened and would not have made the difference without combining that as well. So let me congratulate Peter Thiel on being literally with the ability to anoint the Republican nominee for the United States Senate.
We'll come back to that. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing. Which came first, the money of the endorsement?
Well, no, but not really, because if the money didn't come first, my belief is Donald Trump would have never taken the chance on J.D. Vance. He was consistently running last in the polls, and so without that foundation, there's no way there would have been the endorsement.
Jerry, let me ask you, J.D. Vance.
I don't mean to disagree with you.
No, that's fine. It's a great you can disagree all you want. We're here, as we saw the last time. Jerry, let me ask you, J.D. Vance seems like a candidate who can appeal to say both sides of the Republican Party. He has the Trump endorsement, so the Trump supporters, in theory, will follow him. But he's got a great business resume. He's for low tax, low regulation. He's got business Chamber of Commerce cred. Does he? That's my question to you. How do you beat him?
Well, I think let's acknowledge two realities. One is that Rex gave a long answer, but he's right. The short answer is, yeah, he only won because of Donald Trump's endorsement. I think saying anything else is disingenuous, but you're right. The Thiel money laying the groundwork, of course, was necessary and sufficient. But how do you beat J.D. Vance? I think the conversation you just heard prior to us kind of spells out what the fault lines are. Tim Ryan is reasonably well defined and is clearly proven that he's going to run with an economic issue-centered campaign message. We still don't really know what Vance is going to pivot into for the general election. What we do know is that he is not well defined, and that does create an opportunity, even in a tough year, in a tough state for Democrats. Just this morning, Politico, maybe it was last night, Politico found his own super PAC's oppo book on him and posted it online. Great read. I
think we heard it over the past hour.
Yeah, there's no question. Yeah. You know, if y'all want to waste some of your time, feel free to read it because it's actually fascinating. But you know, we're going to hear about how J.D. Vance called rape inconvenient, and we're going to hear about how he definitely prefers to live in D.C. and or the coast. And I know where he lives, and not to sound too creepy about it, but he lives not far from me in Cincinnati, and his house does not look like where most Ohioans live. And I think we're going to hear about that. And you know, I do think Bob is right that the environment right now is not good for Democrats. I think we all agree with that. But there's a reason you have elections, and campaigns matter, and candidates matter. And I think there's an opportunity, and because JD has not defined himself yet, there's an opportunity for Democrats to define him before he gets the chance to do so.
Speaking of defining, Joe, JD Vance has defined Tim Ryan as a Trump Democrat. Is he wrong?
I actually think the biggest opportunity for Tim Ryan has been the ability to define himself while the Republican Party was having this intensely messy primary election, right? I don't think JD is defining Tim Ryan. I think Tim Ryan is defining Tim Ryan, and it's Tim Ryan from a high school gymnasium, it's Tim Ryan from a diner, it's Tim Ryan shooting darts in a sports bar. It is the Tim Ryan that's always lived in the Valley, not Silicon Valley, but Steel Valley. And so I think that is actually an excellent opportunity for us to start talking to people from those spaces where in the last panel we acknowledged, Democrats get elected in cities, Republicans get elected in extra more rural areas, but I think Tim Ryan is actually going right at that space that we need to get back. I don't think anybody has defined Tim Ryan yet, except for who he is, and that's actually the person he's always been.
Rex, there was a lot of defining of JD Vance in the primary, a lot of defining of all the candidates, always pretty negative. Democrats will say, even Mark Weaver, Republican strategist, wrote in the Washington Post, I think yesterday or today, that 70% of Ohio Republicans voted against Donald Trump's pick in the Senate race. Can the party unify and elect JD Vance?
Oh, yeah, the party will identify. There'll be nothing like one question. Few of us ever do the same thing 100% of the time. Tim Ryan has, and that's agree with Joe Biden 100% of the time. And Biden's destructive agenda will have more to do with the election of J.D. Vance than any other single thing. And there is no question there will be an enormously good year here in Ohio and beyond for Republicans in general, but also we have an extraordinarily successful, popular governor who's actually leading the ticket in the state, who probably could have won the Democrat primary had his name been on the ballot there as well. And so I look for Tim Ryan to be trounced, and really it's very difficult for him to get oxygen.
Jerry, does Tim Ryan campaign with Joe Biden? Does he feature Joe Biden in his ads, or does he give him the George W. Bush treatment of 2006 and kind of ignore him?
Well, Joe Biden's in Ohio tomorrow, so it'll be interesting to see who shows up with him. Look, I think one of the defining things that we've seen both in the American political landscape in the last 5-6 years is that candidates value authenticity. I think that'll be a fault line in the Senate race. There's a lot about J.D. Vance that I think you can point to as showing that he's not an authentic person. Whereas to Joe's point, Tim is who he is, like him or hate him. And yeah, he does. I think he will stand with Joe Biden. I don't know if you'll see him in ads. That's a strategic choice that gets made later down the line. But I don't think you're going to see him run away from Joe Biden. I think he understands that voters respect authenticity. Several years ago, we saw Allison Wonderby Grimes in Kentucky get demolished for refusing to say she voted for Barack Obama. I think people are willing to accept a lot of things out of candidates they don't agree with if they feel like their candidate is straight up with them. And Tim Ryan's that kind of personality that I don't think he's going to try to do something that he's not.
Mike Ditto, you mentioned Peter Thiel. $15 million that we know of he contributed to this campaign. That's a lot of money. Is that good for a democracy to have one person have that much influence? I could argue, anointed a possible U.S. Senator.
I think that kind of leap is something that discounts voter attitudes. There's no question out there that people and money influences elections in a variety of different ways. But I think at the end of the day, whether you have a Peter Thiel or a Donald Trump or somebody weighing in, you still have voters who have the ability to make those decisions on their own. Voters have to take that opportunity to educate themselves about the candidates and know a little bit more about them and do everything that they can to not let just one singular person or entity influence them, in my view. I mean, I agree with what Rex said. When you look at a guy like Tim Ryan, He may be the guy in the high school gymnasium and talking to people at the grassroots level, but he is somebody who is also very well defined, as you guys said. But that definition hasn't exactly been positive. You look at his electoral history. I think when he was first elected to Congress back in 2000, he won with 77, 78% of the vote. Of course, the districts have changed over time a little bit, but in 2020, when he last ran for re-election, he lost his home county and only won with 52 or 53% of the vote. That is a very, very, very big departure. And so what I think voters in Ohio are going to do this election and future elections are figure out not just about the money and not who endorses individual candidates, but what do those voters, or what do those candidates really stand for, and do the voters really have a particular candidate that appeals to them?
Rex, on that, because you brought up Peter Thiel and the money, how it's so instrumental. Is that a good thing?
Well, I don't know whether it's a good thing or not. Let's deal with reality. The fact is, I'll answer it by saying there was a candidate on the ballot who spent $7 million more than those combined figures. So if you really look at, I separated yesterday spending pro each individual coupled with their direct spending. Josh Mandel spent $22 million. If you look at his direct campaign and that of parties advocating on his behalf, he spent 35% more than the person who comes in second behind him in spending. J.D. Vance, even with that, is in terms that I'm looking only at TV spending. So admittedly, there's the art, there's the science, and there's tactics. My lens is always through the art, and I don't know whether that's right, wrong, or different, but that's what I focus on. And as I look at this, it tells me message matters, approach matters, tactics matter. Money's only one factor. It's a significant and important factor. It often gets misused. So therefore, people just look at it and want to attribute it to the money. Well, it's not. It's also, you have to be smart. You have to utilize the art. You have to understand the science in terms of how to use it, where to use it, how to be effective. And, I would say that J.D. Vance, in my opinion, approached seeking the Trump endorsement actually with his dignity. Many of the candidates danced on the public stage like monkeys. And if the only issue was going to be who Trump endorsed, you shouldn't be surprised when you're disappointed if you don't get the endorsement. I wanted to bring a couple ads to demonstrate this point, both affirmatively and positively, but I guess the system doesn't work.
We've all seen
So I could, I couldn't resist showing a couple ads.
No, please.
But, it's an advertising, but nonetheless, the point is this. Trump's appeal to most people in the Republican constituency that he's consolidated and built is what you've discussed, was authenticity. You know what? There is real power in watching someone talk that you don't know what they're going to say, right? And so, therefore, you tune in, and you're very interested, and you begin to develop an attachment. The reality is, it is a great drama when someone does that. It is a poor comedy when people attempt to try to mimic it. And what we saw, I think, in the Republican primary, and not to insult any of my friends who were on that stage, but the reality is they're missing the point. If they really want to succeed and be Trump-like, it's to be authentic. It's to say something. It's not to say, oh, I walk like him, I talk like him, I think I smell like him. And so the reality is that does not and will not work because it's not real. It's not authentic.
Joe, let me get to you on Tim Ryan.
I wasn't finished.
I know.
Let's see authenticity, because I'd love to do that.
That's kind of where I want to go to. And there were a lot of things in the last panel that, bumped up against the truth or away from the truth. But one thing is true. The Democrats have lost ground in traditional Democratic counties here in Ohio. The Mahoning Valley, the northwest of Ohio. And how is Tim Ryan going to get those voters back when he has been constantly losing those votes?
I think there's a hometown pride for it, one. Two, I think if you're trying to claim authenticity and you're putting that word next to J.D. Vance or Tim Ryan, it's not even a competition, right? Whoever asked the question about why don't we why don't we just sit here and scroll through our phones when you argue, I stopped watching CNN on January 6th too, and that's when I stopped watching J.D. Vance take different sides of an issue, right? I voted for Hillary Clinton. I'm an ever-Trumper too. I'm pro-Trump. I have one other check that I want to know what was written, and that's the one that Peter Thiel wrote to Donald Trump to actually get that endorsement, because let's face that, he didn't do it out of the kindness of his heart. But I do think when you talk about authenticity and you talk to Tim Ryan and you see Tim Ryan on the air alongside these guys, there's no question that he is going to bring back those bases. And also I would like to add that, well, yeah, there has been bleed from rural areas in Ohio and sort of exurban areas. The suburban areas, there is massive amounts of growth too. We just had the chair of the Republican Party get on this stage and once again refuse to acknowledge the independent, bipartisan work of the fair elections of this democracy. I do believe that of the 1.5 million people that did vote and the other 3 to 4 that didn't show up, I think that's a problem that's going to have to be answered, and answered sincerely. And I think I'm speaking to the majority in this room that probably realizes that actual votes were counted legitimately. I've sat in those board of elections where Republicans and Democrats sit next to each other and count them. This last time around, they received death threats for doing it. I think this is fundamental to talking about how our democracy moves forward. And I think Tim Ryan's going to bring that to people. 2020 was one of the most hectic years of my life, of everybody's lives, right? People were scared, they were sick, they were fighting, they were divided. And you're trying to tell me that Joe Biden, of all people, the one we accused of hiding in the basement for too long, is now the guy that's going to divide everybody. I actually think there is a common sense, didn't show up for the primary, but I'm going to make a choice about the future of my country, showing up for this general election, and they didn't show up for that election. And I think that message will matter, and I think both candidates will have plenty of money to get that message out. I just think Tim Ryan is far and away more sincere than J.D. Vance is, and it's all on video, so we can watch it play out.
Pivoting to the governor's race, who's leading the Ohio Republican Party? Is it Mike DeWine or Donald Trump?
I think it's Mike DeWine. And if you look at some of the statistics from past years, my prediction today is that, given the governor's success in a 4-way primary, which was exceedingly strong, he was getting attacked from the other 3 pretty aggressively, in some cases more than others. My prediction today is that this 2022 general election looks a little bit better for Republicans than 2010 did. I went back and looked at some of the stats, and on this primary 2 days ago, we had 1.07 million Republican votes cast in this primary, and there were only about 500,000 or so in the Democratic primary. You go back to 2010, looking at my notes here, 630,000 Democrats voted and 745,000 Republicans. That is a very, very big increase over time. I think Mike DeWine has led the state very successfully during the COVID crisis, one that was so unexpected and something that the entire country was unprepared for, and he led with great decision making, and the voters saw that in this last primary, and I think he leads this party, and I think he wins handily.
There was no U.S. Senate campaign in the 2010 primary, correct? I'm doing my math in my head.
There was a competitive Democratic primary.
That's right.
In 2010, which I think is important context, because you do raise, sorry.
No,
It's a good point. I don't think any Democrat can look at just the raw vote totals on Tuesday and whistle past the graveyard and say it's okay. But I think the 2010 comparison isn't quite apples to apples. You had a very expensive Democratic Senate primary. The way I remember is that Senator Portman kind of had that sewed up on the Republican side. But I do think when we look at kind of overall with the shifts that have happened in Ohio since 2010, voters are way more polarized now than they were in 2010. I just think the floor and the ceiling for each party is much more narrowly defined. This universe of persuadable voters that used to be perhaps a plurality in Ohio is incredibly small. I don't think there's any disagreeing that Republicans have a numerical advantage advantage in Ohio with some of the realignments that have happened nationally that we've seen in Ohio. But I don't think 2010 is what's coming. Simply because, one, that was following an election where there was another realignment that happened. This is not following a realignment election. Two, as we all know, there's redistricting this year, which will eventually end. Whenever the guys down the street want to figure out, whenever the guys down the street decide they want to follow the Constitution, it will end, or run out the clock. And 2010 was the end of the decade, right? So more seats had changed, had shifted, had fluctuated. This is the beginning of a decade with a much more polarized electorate. And I just think, despite, there's certainly a numerical advantage for Republicans, but I think the high bound and the low bound of that for each party is just much more narrow than it was in 2010.
Rex, I'm going to ask you a question. Mike DeWine won, clear plurality, but more than half of Ohio Republican primary voters chose someone different. Joe Blystow, a little-known farmer from Canal, Winchester, won 22 counties in Ohio. He won 22, primarily rural counties. And even the ones that Mike DeWine won in rural Ohio, he got like 35, 34% of the vote. Does he have anything to worry about with regards to the antipathy or the opposition to him in rural Ohio? Mike DeWine has.
Yeah, first of all, I think there will be a great consolidation. Those voters who might have disagreed with the governor in terms of his COVID policies ultimately will surrender to the simple fact that he has crushed it on issues of combating inflation and creating jobs in Ohio beyond precedence in difficult circumstances. Mike alluded to, and others, if I were a Democrat, I guess the thing that would frighten me most, obviously, is that only half as many people wanted to show up to the primary as did in the Republican primary. The reality is that primaries are held, and on election day, people are nominated, and then election's over. There's new issues, there's a new debate, there's a new energy, there's a new focus, and there will be nothing, just to disagree with you a little bit, there'll be nothing that unifies people in Ohio, actually more than Joe Biden, not tearing people apart. It will unify them because they are so freaked out about the prices of gas and about inflation and about interest rates rising and about the fact that they can't reasonably buy a home if they don't already have one. Those are the things that really will matter to people. And the nitpicks that took place in primaries over how long we wore the masks are already today irrelevant.
I await the ads for the venture capitalist from Silicon Valley trying to tell all of Ohio that he's working for working families and helping them fill up their gas tank.
Dan Whaley, it was tough to get a read on this race. There wasn't any real public polling out there. Maybe folks in this room saw internal polls. She won by a 2-1 margin.
Yeah.
You guys surprised by that?
I will be the first one. We put them all up on the board the night before the election. A lot of varying people across our consultancy and elected officials. I had her at 14. She outperformed by over twice as much. It was a very strong run. I think it speaks to 2024 as well and shared staying power. But I will say this about my party. We had two very serious, very reasonable gubernatorial candidates running strong races on a message that, may not get ratings, but also we weren't belly bumping each other on debate stages trying to figure out who was going to fight who, right? Also, I put Tim Ryan at the top of that list on it. But having said that, yes, it was a much more tame race. Man stuck to a campaign plan. I think it showed message in campaign discipline, and she outperformed by twice as much as I thought she would, even though I thought she was going to win.
Was it the Democratic slate card that put her over the edge? People just voted?
No, I think what...
She wasn't on the slate.
Yeah, some portion. She wasn't.
Yeah, no, I understand the overall point. My takeaway from the primary, first of all, I think Joe's absolutely right about Mayor Whaley's victory and how decisive it was. But I think both parties' primaries, particularly on the gubernatorial side, because the Senate side, at a certain point, it did become all noise. There were so many names like people went to their corners and voted for who they're going to vote for. But I think in the gubernatorial races, it's actually an incredibly interesting snapshot in time where both parties are. I don't know how we can say Governor DeWine's the leader of his party when he can't get a majority in his own primary. That seems like a pretty tough thing to sell. I don't know the last time an incumbent governor got under 50% in their primary for re-election. And I think it speaks to where his electorate is. There was a point in time, not that long ago, a year and a half ago, where he had a better approval rating amongst Democrats than Republicans. I think we saw that again on Tuesday. That speaks to where the Republican Party in Ohio is. I think similarly with Mayor Whaley's pretty decisive victory on Tuesday, that speaks to where the Democratic primary is, or party is in Ohio. I think this party is looking for fresh, new energy. I think they're looking for strong female leadership. I think they're looking for a strong progressive vision. And I think the fact that Mayor Whaley was successful in doing so, despite the fact that there was maybe $5 million spent cumulatively in that primary, both candidates, Mayor Cranley and Mayor Whaley, were not particularly well known outside their home bases, speaks to where the party is. And I do think, as we look to November, it does at least create an interesting dichotomy. I think certainly, as I said, voters are polarized, and this is a center-right state where Republicans do start out with an advantage. But Governor DeWine has some cleaning up to do in his own house. And the key will be, do those voters come home for him because polarization is so high? They very well might. But it does create an opportunity for Mayor Whaley to try to peel off some of the voters who are mad at the way Governor DeWine handled the pandemic. I would argue he handled it responsibly. I would argue that there were some things that he should have done better instead of cave into the voters that still ultimately rejected him on Tuesday. But I do think it creates an opportunity for Mayor Whaley in general. And there aren't a ton of elections around the country this fall where that opportunity exists. So that's my takeaway from Mayor Whaley's victory.
Rick, so ask you a question. Will the next time that Donald Trump comes to Ohio for a rally, will Mike DeWine be there, or will he find another day of Ohio president's birthday and he has to celebrate?
I think COVID this time.
I think it was disrespect to the governor's vote.
No,
Last
the original.
yeah, which I agree. That's not running off to something that you can suggest. But anyways, the fact that the governor will be wherever it's prudent to be. I think he certainly welcomes Donald Trump's support and anybody else's. The reality is, I wanted to comment too on the last question because Cranley did outspend Whaley by $400,000. One of the things that I looked at yesterday was what percentage of the ads that they ran, on what subjects were they on? And Whaley spent her time talking about jobs and spent 100% of the time she mentioned Cranley negatively about jobs. She ran a very good message campaign, a message-driven campaign, a disciplined message campaign, based on kind of what I'm just looking at in terms of what dollars were spent and what the messages were. And in contrast, really, with only one exception, Cranley ran nearly all of his messages on general positives. And so although he outspent the opponent, I don't think he effectively used his money nor engaged in the same debate. And she had the core support of what I would say is the core primary constituency of the Democrat Party. As the Republicans fought over that territory, now defined as Trump voters, being the core, core far side of that constituency. And it is clear to me that Whaley was focused on being able to consolidate her base, but also at the same time be talking to the middle ground. So it's always fun to pontificate about what someone else did. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No,
That answers the question I chose to.
Well, my question was, does Mike DeWine campaign actively
I
against Donald Trump?
don't think he'll avoid Donald Trump, and I think there are many things.
Not
that
avoid, he campaign actively with him. He's in his ads, goes up on.
I don't think he's probably. It would not surprise me to see him on the stage at some point with Donald Trump.
Is that good news or bad news for Democrats?
I mean, the replay of John Husted getting booed in Dayton for a reason that I still don't think the crowd knew why in 2020 is just something that, any candidate that has to answer the question any Republican candidate, elected official, that has to answer the question, Donald Trump's coming to town. Am I showing up at the rally, or am I conveniently heading some other way? Actually speaks directly to the quintessential divide that I think the Republican Party has to deal with itself. Like half my family are moderate, business-oriented Republicans. I run my own business. I employ people. I want to make decisions based on rational, long-term thinking and planning. And like every time Donald Trump comes to town, it's a whirlwind. It becomes a crisis communications class for every candidate who's coming to town based on where they are. And I do think Mike DeWine's going to have to continue to make that decision. I think J.D. Vance is desperately going to try and run back to the middle and be who he is. But on the other end of it, Donald Trump loves Ohio, so he'll keep coming back here for more rallies and more attention, even if those people drive from outside the state to see him. And we're going to have people like Marcy Kaptur's opponent, poor Teresa Gavarone, moved twice. Marcy Kaptur is now running against a QAnon conspiracy theorist who literally painted Donald Trump's face on his lawn. You're going to have to figure out, like, okay, which side am I going to? The guy who made the rap, the Let's Go Brandon rap, or the Mike DeWine wing of the party, who I would actually argue that's exactly who I'm going to keep talking to, because I have to make business decisions. I would actually, Mike DeWine's going to run his campaign on Intel, right? I would say Intel, and I'm not taking away for the work that John Husted did working with Democrats in Franklin County and the city of Columbus to bring that major project here. That's good jobs and good futures for people. But I also know that the nexus of what built around that was business, the economics of business and Democrats working together in metropolitan areas to make investments in its locale so other companies could come here. The biggest problem anyone from Intel would tell you is that our biggest concern is finding qualified workers in this state to fill those jobs, and everybody's running under it to catch it. So are we going to have this attack on building a better economy or making sure government makes investments in right places? Because, you know, if that's the argument that the Republican Party continuously has to have with itself every time this comes down, it's going to make it a lot harder for people in this room to make long-term decisions on their investments. And I think the Republican Party is going to have to continue to answer that. Tim Ryan got, what, 72, 73%? I think our party's decided on where we are.
Like the question can be asked of every Republican candidate, two questions. Was the 2020 election stolen? And was January 6th legitimate political discourse? How do you advise candidates to answer that? How do you think they will answer? Republicans are talking about.
I think by and large, you see in Ohio anyway, Republican candidates, particularly incumbent members of Congress and others, confirm that the 2020 election results stand. Joe Biden is the president, and that on top of that, that January 6th was a real problem for this country in a variety of ways. I don't think you see anybody in Ohio at the federal level shying away from that. And to kind of touch on what was said.
Jim Jordan's from Ohio, though.
There are exceptions. There are exceptions. There are exceptions. But you know, to your point about whether or not candidates will attach themselves to Donald Trump when he comes to town as kind of a dovetail of that, I think by and large they will, particularly when Democrats control everything right now. They control the White House, they control Congress. Gas is at $4 a gallon. Joe Biden's popularity ranges from 38 to 42%. The question that you asked earlier is, will Tim Ryan have Joe Biden around to campaign for him? And I think the answer is no. And I think there are enough independent voters who see how things played out under Donald Trump in terms of a robust economy that they want to go back to that, and that they're going to blame Joe Biden for the problems that we have today.
Jerry Whaley's message, part of her victory speech the other night, was that Mike DeWine does not care about Ohioans. He was the guy who was on TV every day for months trying to keep us safe from COVID. Does that fly? Does that message
I saw Greg Abbott on TV for Mike DeWine. I saw Mike DeWine shooting an ad at the border, which, unless he's talking about Kentucky, I don't know what southern border he feels like he needs to care about. I think there's, when Mayor Whaley is talking about that Governor DeWine doesn't care about Ohioans, My assumption is that what she's talking about is we are now a month away from 50 years of precedent with Roe being struck down, and Mike DeWine proudly declares himself the most pro-life governor in Ohio history. The majority of Ohioans are pro-choice. That's not caring about Ohioans. I think when he goes back on his word to do everything he can to keep Ohioans safe during COVID because he's scared of Ron Hood or something, that's a mistake, and I think people see that. I think people also understand that right now, the legislature, the folks that you guys in this room have to work with every day, are passing bills that are incomprehensible to where most Ohioans spend their time every day. They're not talking about gas prices or inflation or housing costs. They're talking about banning books and critical race theory. And Mike DeWine is signing those bills hoping no one will notice. So my guess is that's what Mayor Whaley is talking about. And I think there's a story to tell there. I also think when First Energy comes around, people have their hand out. That's not caring about Ohioans. And I think that's the story that she'll tell. So my guess is, I haven't spoken with her about it, but that's my guess is what she means.
Let's talk about November. A lot is going to happen between now and November. Here are the things we know that are going to happen. Inflation will rise or fall, likely stay higher than it has been. Interest rates likely will rise again, even if slightly. Congress is going to hold hearings on the January 6th insurrection. And of course, there is the Supreme Court ruling on Roe versus Wade. Those are the things we know that are going to happen. And there's going to be 3 or 4 things that we can't predict. So which one of these is going to have a profound impact on voters' moods in November? How do you think, Rex, how do you think these outside issues will play out?
That was a very focused question.
Yeah. Outside influence. Let's start with Roe.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, yeah, there's all kinds of volatile issues. I guess one of the things I would say is, I hope what will come out of all of this discussion and the one transition that maybe will take place through this election cycle is that, and I love campaign war, but that's to be for the campaign field. And may on election day the war end and governing begin on inaugural day. That's the real transition that has to take place in American politics in Ohio. On all of these issues that divide us and separate us, but nonetheless still can be a way that we begin to work through very difficult issues together. And I think there has to be a real change in the mood that campaigns don't go on after election day endlessly. So I don't know if that answers your question, other than to say,
well, will Roe galvanize Democrats?
I mean, obviously,
losing Roe in 73 has galvanized Republicans.
Yeah, I think that's a deep ideological issue that even transcends politics with a lot of people, certainly on the side of the issue that tends to be more consolidated on the Republican side. And so it certainly will energize many Democrats who have a different view, whereas probably the base of the Republican Party believes that it's a 50-year investment actually in what happened. That's the reality in terms of the divide of the 2 constituencies and the reality of the ideological differences. And given the fact all of a sudden it's not talk, that there's reality to it, will give some new life to those folks on the Republican side that really lean more towards these concerns and that will be a part of a new Democratic constituency. We see a real change because, frankly, most of the Trump voters are former Democrats. I mean, it's really a part of more rural constituency, and there are issues of division that have made up this new Republican Party. So I think this is an issue that also can probably will bring some realignment to the Democratic Party as the Trump voters have to the Democratic Party.
Joe, how will this play out?
I mean, I'll say this. In terms of energizing, I'm not going to congratulate the party in the Supreme Court on its 50 years of work. I had to break that news to my wife the other day. She is a upstanding graduate level degree person who came from a working class family just outside of Milwaukee. She has her master's. She works for a Fortune 500 company. She was in tears when I broke that news to her on Wednesday about Roe. I'm telling you right now, there are hundreds of thousands of women, I can feel it, across the state that maybe weren't paying as much attention on Tuesday that were paying attention on Wednesday, and they are mad. And again, we have had, in the last week, Roe v. Wade probably being overturned if the leaked documents stay the same. A former member of Congress and current member of the State House say pregnancy through rape can be an opportunity or it's just inconvenient, as said by J.D. Vance. If you're worried about a brain drain, about trades, professional, whatever, if you want to attract the necessary workforce we need to compete with these states on the coast, we have to stop talking like this, right? And so yes, I felt the motivation within a night. I think you will see it play out and continue to grow because that ruling hasn't even come down yet. It's not official, but it also doesn't sound like it's changing.
Mike, full disclosure, we're 5 white males up here, so I feel odd asking this question. Nan Whaley is the first female candidate from a major party running for governor. At the time this decision is going to come down, whatever the decision is, does that give her a little more of an argument against Mike DeWine?
Sure, I think that is something that the Democrat, that the decision of the U.S. Supreme Court is something that the Democrats will be able to latch onto. Because right now, I think otherwise, everybody's going to be thinking about what's happening in their own homes and what's happening in their pocketbooks. We talked about the inflation costs and everything that's rising across the whole country. That is what people go to the ballot box for. They go to the ballot box to vote on pocketbook issues by and large. Do they get galvanized by, the Democrats get galvanized by this issue? I think that's entirely possible. And, you know, I heard Jared say, you know, talking about the first energy issue. I mean, say what you want about that. I don't think that is an issue that galvanizes people this election. I don't think that Nan Whaley or anybody else would be able to credibly use that. What was happening in 2020, the Republicans in the legislature increased in the Senate and maintained their majority and strength a little bit in the House. So I think that issue is kind of not I don't want to say gone by the wayside, but I don't think it's as salient of an issue as the economy and certainly for Democrats, some of these issues dealing with abortion.
Jerry, the former speaker of the Ohio House is under indictment. Faces trial.
Which one?
Well,
There's only one.
It's the House. How do Democrats make people care about this? It's a complicated issue. Didn't really affect us too much in the pocketbook. A few bucks on our electric bill. How do you make?
$10 on electric bill seems pretty relevant.
Well, $5. I mean, it's not hundreds of dollars on your electric bill.
How much have gas prices gone up in the last year? $1.50, $2. I think $5 a month on your electric bill should be relevant. I think if we're talking about getting costs down, one party is responsible for renewable energy standards going down and your electric bill going up. I think that's pretty simple. I also don't hear any plans. I mean, genuinely, I don't hear any plans from Republicans down the street about getting costs down. I hear a lot about critical race theory and banning books and rate being an opportunity. I hear plenty of that. I hear plenty about running out the clock on constitutional redistricting reform. I hear plenty of trying to impeach a Republican Supreme Court justice. I don't hear anything about getting my electric bill back down.
How about the nuclear bailout investigation in the scale? How do you use that? Will they use that as a campaign?
$60 million to them, your gas price, your electric bill went up. I feel like that's pretty easy to understand, it's pretty easy to sell. I do agree with Mike though. It's not as salient as it should be. And I think that's a shame. I think it gets back to polarization. I think it gets back to people feeling like they need to be entrenched with their team, even if that means you're taking the side of corrupt elected officials. Because to me, it's losing sight of why people send them here. It's losing sight of what we all have an obligation to do in our job, to us and you. And I think that's a shame. And I do think it will be an issue. I don't know how much is going to hinge voter behavior, but I think it's a shame. I think it's honestly embarrassing that it's not a bigger issue.
I think it's tough too to use that issue when both parties support the bill. Democrats and Republicans support it.
Sure, I see only Republicans in handcuffs though. In the leadership of the House in handcuffs. I don't see Democrats in handcuffs on the issue.
Moving to the economy, in 2012 and 2014, I called it the Obama Kasich recovery. If the GDP falls again next quarter, can we call it the Biden-DeWine recession? Can you campaign against Joe Biden next on the recession, on the inflation, high interest rates, but not campaign against DeWine?
Yes.
But if Trump voters are unhappy, they will play one more than the other.
Earlier, I mean, DeWine is crushing it in terms of job creation, fighting, the uphill battle as it relates to inflation, some of the national trends that that exist. And so I think no one's going to be looking at those issues and blaming Mike DeWine. I mean, the reality is Ohio is in a good shape and going in the right direction. And he's been a leader that's appealed also very much to Democrats and independents, and probably is the most popular Republican governor among nonpartisans and Democrats in my lifetime.
Speaking to the right direction, wrong direction, these are some simple facts of the last decade of which the Republicans have been in charge. We have had 2 speakers of the House indicted. We have dropped from 5th in education to 37th in Ohio. We were voted Ohio's most corrupt state just a year and a half ago. These aren't trends that there's not a lot that we can brag about here. And you can wrap it around one specific project, Intel, all the way through, but we lost a congressional seat in this redistricting period because we are quite simply not growing as fast as other states. And I'm an Ohioan first. I want to compete against Michigan, Indiana, Pennsylvania. I'm proud of Columbus. I'm proud of how we step up and we lean in. I know Jared's proud of Cincinnati. We want that to be the entire state. But right now, like, those 2 metropolitan areas are kind of dragging everybody else across the line right now. And we do have to change that. It's just something that I would say people feel like Ohio is on the right track. Don't know that that's necessarily true, and there are plenty of data points to show that.
Mike, one question that comes up, it came up in the Democratic primary for governor, is that, yeah, Intel's great, but it's again another win for Columbus. And I've heard from both Republicans in rural areas and Democrats in other areas, Northeast Ohio, Southwest Ohio, say, you know, Columbus is getting all the goodies. So is there I hate to say there's a downside to, you know, 3,000 jobs.
We pay up front on the investment for the infrastructure that makes places like Intel want to come in to reinvest in our city.
Mike, is there a chance that Intel could not be the total win that it appears to be?
I don't think so. I think it will be a win for the state and for Governor DeWine, Lieutenant Governor Husted. And I think, too, it's also, you don't want to just discount this one project, but look at the rebirth that you've seen in Cleveland over the last decade, 15 years. There are other pockets of the state that are growing, too, but the Intel project happened to have, I don't want to speak for the folks at Jobs Ohio, I know some of them are here. They did a great job identifying the site that was ready and available and made sense logistically. It is Columbus right now, it makes sense for that project, but I don't think that that means that places like Cincinnati and Cleveland won't be the beneficiary of those types of projects in the future.
Get to the divided question, we mentioned it earlier, but you know, Ohio is very divided. The Republican Party is divided, the Democrats are divided, maybe less clearly, but they're divided between progressives and more moderate folks. How long does this division last?
Look, I think this division is a symptom of the larger national division. Like I mentioned earlier, I think the governor's race is particularly interesting this year because you have a Republican incumbent governor whose top line numbers are very good. I don't think there's anything disputing that, but who has issues with his base. And you have a somewhat lesser known Democratic nominee, but who brings energy and has that opportunity to exploit those advantages. I know I keep saying this, and I think it's the biggest problem that affects our democracy right now. I'm sure you guys all experienced it in trying to advocate for your company or your organization, but polarization makes it really hard to have real conversations about issues that matter. You know, I think we all feel like, you know, we do the best we can to talk about, get a win on something that we can, and live to fight to the next one. And at the end of the day, a lot of times we're just subject to whatever the national trend is, whatever the mood is. Ohioans, to the question on the last bit, Ohioans have self-selected, and you look at what's happened in Hamilton County. When Sherrod Brown was elected to the Senate in 2006, won by double digits statewide, lost Hamilton County. 2018, he gets reelected. He was 6 or 7 points. He won Hamilton County by nearly 20. People in Ohio have self-selected that they want to be with people who think, vote, act the same way that they do. That makes it really hard to overcome divisions. People aren't having neighbors or people that they're sitting in church or synagogue that they disagree with. It's not just here. It's not something that Ohio is at fault for, but it's a symptom that we're feeling here. So to answer your question, I don't see it changing in 2022. I don't know when it changes, but I think you look at just the people that talk about the political geography of Ohio, and it's usually brought up in that faith, talking about justifying gerrymandering. But there is some truth about where people kind of go to their corners. Quite literally in Ohio, people go to their corners. And it's a problem. And I don't know how Ted Strickland in 2006 builds that coalition ever again for a Democrat. I don't know how Rob Portman, Rob Portman used to carry Hamilton County every race he ever ran. I don't know if he can do that again. And obviously we all know what's happening here in Franklin, and has happened in Franklin, and continues to happen in Delaware. So no, the short answer is I don't think that changed anytime soon.
Rex, how do you get a rural person to vote for a Democrat? How do you get an urban person to vote for a Republican?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me go to your broader question that I think you asked, and that is, can there be change? The answer is yes. Can there be a new spirit of unity? The answer is yes. And I believe, obviously, 90% of congressional districts in the country and legislative districts are drawn from one party to hold or the other. And that's why I think as we progress and begin seeing things such as happening currently in Alaska, I know on the ballot in Nevada, as Ren quoting, as happened in Virginia, we were involved in that, allows for a broader appeal and for majority to rule. And if majority ruled, we actually would have a change in leadership and environment. And I believe those things are coming. It has to get dark, and you have to feel misery before you know that it's time to awaken.
We're not miserable
and I
enough.
believe that's coming.
We're not miserable enough right now?
Huh?
We're not miserable enough right now?
We're just about there.
How much, there's a lot of political folks in this room, and media folks, I'm not going to, we love conflict, we like the horse race.
Gets real.
How much do political campaigns and how much do folks in the media, what do we have to do to change the tenor? Can we change the tenor?
I'm going to put the media in on this one too, because we all follow ratings, clicks, and polling, right? It has to be a general sense of turning the temperature down, which I think actually in January of 2021 was Joe Biden's entire thing. We have to turn the temperature down. I think we have to help and support that too. One of the best things I know that people don't know or think about when they're choosing this social wedge issue or that social wedge issue is who's working with whom on what behind the scenes. I know in Columbus, Ohio, for the last decade, I had, disclaimer, client Congresswoman Joyce Beatty and former Congressman Steve Stivers, who probably didn't get along on a lot of social issues, but when it came to regionality and working for business, there was room to work together for the greater good of your region. Joyce is still here, the Congresswoman. Unfortunately, Jim Jordan's the loudest member of the caucus for the Republicans in Ohio right now. And I always knew no matter what happened, and I always told people this when they asked, it's not all, yes, politics, we do what we do. Campaigns, we do what we do. But afterwards, there used to be this sense of, all right, it's over, we get back to work. It's not what's going to play out on TV or in the newspapers, but we're going to accomplish some good things there, right? That seems to be slipping it more and more away. And so, you know, the more QAnon conspiracy theorists that we put on the ballot as the general election candidate for Congress, yes, that is going to continue to concern.
Mike, can Rob Portman stand at the White House with the infrastructure bill if he was running for re-election this year?
Oh, sure, and I think he's one of those people that has that record of accomplishment of this state, that people, the voters, have given him the benefit of the doubt and his ability to cross party lines, but also not compromise his conservative credentials. I think he could do that, and I agree with what was just said. I mean, I think so much of the partisanship right now is because it probably existed for a long time. Those divisions have lasted for decades, if not longer. But we have access to everything on our phones in a moment's notice right now. There was a story a couple of years ago about how members of Congress who had not met each other, they'd never physically been in the same room together, were tweeting at each other in their offices or down the hall. That's not how democracy should work. That's not how government should work. There is a sense, though, and you touched on this too a little bit, that bipartisanship, unfortunately, doesn't sell in the press. It's the salacious things that get picked up. I bet you if you were to pull the statistics today and look at the votes in the Ohio General Assembly right now, while Jared's talking about critical race theory and other things, certainly those bills are out there, they are being debated, they are being discussed, but there is still other work and passage of legislation that's going on. I'll bet you 90 to 95% of the bills passing on the General Assembly, at least has been recently, are voted with a bipartisan vote. But it's not those that get covered, and that's sad. I think we all have to take ownership of that. It's not just the media, it's not just elected officials, it's the voters, it's all of us. We all have to do better.
Jared, I'll let you have the last word. Do you have hope?
So, Rex, you gave me hope. Here's how I think literally us sitting in this room, us sitting up here, can help make progress on this. Let's you and I work together.
Done.
Let's work together on a statewide ballot initiative, ranked choice voting,
I'm for it.
top 2 primaries. Everyone of each party runs in one primary. Top 2 winners go to November. Sometimes it'll be 2 Republicans, sometimes it'll be 2 Democrats, sometimes it'll be one of each. I'm doing the Alaska governor's race, as you mentioned. It's the first election in the country right now that has ever had a top 4 primary in ranked choice voting. So every voter in Alaska in November is going to have 4 options on their ballot. They rank them 1 through 4. Second place winner gets to take the third place winner's vote. And if they get 50%, they leapfrog the first place. No person can be elected without getting the majority of someone's votes. I think we can do a lot of work, a lot of good in this state if we went to top 2 primaries. So even in Fulton County, Williams County, Northwest Ohio, where they're going to get 2 Republicans in the general, they still have to reach across the aisle and get the 28-30% Democrats that live in Williams County to win. In places like Cuyahoga County, maybe you get 2 Democrats, and you have to be the more moderate to appeal to the maybe the independent or Republican voters. Let's do it. Let's do it together, man. Like your firm, my firm. Let's do it. You guys can help us raise the money, right?
Gene Krebs and I are volunteer coaches right now, Ohio RCB working group.
I'm on it. Let's do it. Let's raise the money. Everyone in this room, you guys can help raise the money.
That's how Glenn Young.
Great.
And we did.
There you go. Problem solved.